In modern warfare, a 33-to-1 disadvantage isn't just a challenge, it is a mathematical death sentence. Statistically, when a force is outnumbered 10-to-1, the combat efficiency of the smaller unit usually collapses in less than 30 minutes. The sheer volume of incoming fire simply overwhelms any possible response. Yet in certain pockets of history, from the frozen, blood-stained ridges of Korea to the shimmering heat of the Middle Eastern deserts, small units of roughly 300 men have looked into the eyes of 10,000 attackers and refused to blink. They didn't just hold, they shattered the expectations of every military theorist on the planet. The question isn't just how they survived the first hour, the question is, how did they fundamentally break the laws of probability to actually win? Today we're deconstructing the 300 versus 10,000 phenomenon. We aren't just talking about the ancient myths of Thermopylae or the romanticized stories of the past. We are looking at the verified military science and the cold reality of the last century, where high-tech gear meets low-tech desperation. You're going to learn why mass numbers are often the most deceptive statistic in a war room and the three tactical force multipliers that allow a handful of soldiers to hold the line against a literal army. This isn't about luck, it's about the brutal application of physics and psychology. If you value deep-dive military analysis that respects the reality of the soldier on the ground, consider subscribing to the channel. But first, let's look at the terrifying math of a massacre. Why does a force of 10,000 fail against 300? According to defense analysts, the failure usually starts long before the first shot is fired. It starts with geometry. In military terms, this is the power of the choke point. Whether it's a jagged mountain pass, a narrow urban corridor flanked by rubble, or a single reinforced bridge, the goal is to negate the enemy's width of front. Imagine trying to pour a gallon of water through the eye of a needle. It doesn't matter if you have a gallon or an entire ocean behind it, only a tiny fraction can pass through the aperture at any given moment. For the 300 defenders, they aren't fighting 10,000 men simultaneously. They are fighting the 50 men at the very front of the line over and over again until the bodies of the fallen become an additional physical barrier for the survivors. Have you ever heard of Lanchester's square law? Developed during World War I, it's a mathematical formula used to predict the relative power of military forces. It suggests that the strength of a unit is the square of its numbers. By this cold logic, 10,000 men should be 1,111 times more powerful than 300. So how do the 300 break the law of the square? They use a concept called defilade. In simple terms, defilade means using the natural shape of the earth, like a trench, a ridgeline, or a concrete basement, to shield yourself from enemy fire while maintaining the ability to strike back. By staying in defilade, the 300 soldiers become invisible targets. They are ghosts in the landscape. Meanwhile, the 10,000 attackers are forced into enfilade. They are exposed, bunched together by the terrain, and perfectly aligned for the defenders' grazing fire. In this scenario, one machine gunner doesn't just hit one target, their bullets pass through 3 or 4 men in a single burst, but math and dirt only provide the foundation. To survive the night against those odds, you need something much more lethal: integrated force multipliers. A force multiplier is any factor that dramatically increases the combat effectiveness of a group without adding a single extra soldier to the roster. Think of it like a lever for violence. The most devastating modern force multiplier is integrated fire support. Consider the Battle of Kasham in 2018. A small contingent of roughly 40 U.S. special operators and their local partners were positioned at an outpost when they were targeted by an attacking force of over 500, some reports suggest nearly 1,000, supported by T-72 tanks and heavy artillery. On paper, the outpost should have been erased from the map in minutes. According to official reports, the defenders didn't just rely on their individual rifles, they utilized a God's eye view provided by overhead drones and maintained a direct, unblinking line to AC-130 gunships, Apache helicopters, and B-52 bombers. When you have a small ground force that can summon the equivalent of a lightning bolt from the sky, the 10,000 attackers aren't an army, they are a stationary target in a meat grinder. The defenders aren't fighting with their hands, they are the eyes for a massive, distant machine of destruction. Another critical multiplier is the defender's advantage. Defense analysts suggest that as a standard rule of thumb, an attacking force needs at least a 3-to-1 ratio to defeat a prepared, dug-in defender. But when those defenders are elite, like a Tier 1 Special Operations unit, that ratio can climb to 10-to-1 or higher. Why? Because the 10,000 are fighting gravity exhaustion and the terrifying unknown. The 300 are fighting from home. They have range estimated every landmark, they've mapped every dead zone where the enemy might hide. And they know exactly where the terrain forces the enemy to walk. Every step the 10,000 take has been pre-planned by the 300. There is a massive cinematic misconception about how battles end. We often think a fight only stops when the last soldier on one side is dead. In reality, battles end far sooner. They end when one side loses the psychological will to continue. This is the psychology of the breaking point. When 300 men are surrounded by 10,000, they often experience a phenomenon called functional desperation. Because there is no possibility of retreat and no hope of a quiet surrender, the brain's fight or flight response is forced into a singular, hyper-focused channel: fight. This creates a level of ferocity and tactical discipline that is almost impossible to replicate in a standard skirmish. They aren't fighting for a flag, they are fighting for the man to their left and right, because that is the only way to see tomorrow. On the flip side, look at the 10,000. Within a massive crowd, there is a dangerous sense of anonymity and the diffusion of responsibility. An individual soldier in a massive wave thinks, "There are thousands of us. Surely someone else will lead this charge. Someone else will take the risk." If the 300 defenders can inflict concentrated, horrific casualties on the first wave, if they can kill the first 50 attackers in a particularly visible and brutal fashion, the remaining 9,950 stop seeing themselves as a mighty, unstoppable army. They suddenly see themselves as next in line for the slaughter. Historical data shows that if you can cause 10% to 15% casualties to a large unorganized force in a very tight window, the herd instinct takes over. The entire unit will often rout, dropping their equipment and fleeing in a blind panic. The 300 aren't trying to kill 10,000 bodies. They are trying to kill the concept of victory in the enemy's mind. Once the belief in victory dies, the army dies with it. Beyond the bullets and the bravery, there is a factor that ends more great armies than anything else: logistics. Feeding, hydrating, and providing medical care for 300 men is a manageable logistical task. Coordination is intimate. The commander can see almost every man they lead. Feeding and coordinating 10,000 men in a hostile active combat zone is a living nightmare. Defense analysts often point to command and control friction. In a massed force of 10,000, communications inevitably break down. Radios fail, orders are misinterpreted, and friendly fire becomes a massive, paralyzing risk. In several historical last stands, they showed the attacking 10,000 actually ended up firing on their own units in the confusion of smoke or darkness, or simply stalled because the front line ran out of ammunition and the supply trucks were stuck 3 miles back in a traffic jam. When the 300 are a high readiness unit, their coordination is seamless and fluid. They move like a single multi-headed organism. The 10,000, by contrast, move like a slow, clumsy giant. If the giant cannot land a knockout punch in the first 2 hours of the engagement, the logistical weight of its own size begins to crush it. It starts to starve, dehydrate, and bleed out from 1,000 tiny cuts. So what is the ultimate uncomfortable secret of the 300? It's not just the advanced gear, it's not just the superior terrain or the math of the choke point, it is the value of time. In almost every verified case of a small force holding off a massive one, the victory wasn't about the 300 actually destroying the 10,000. That is a Hollywood fantasy. The real victory was that the 300 bought enough time for a larger strategy to unfold elsewhere. Whether it was the Spartans at Thermopylae allowing the Greek cities to organize their defense, or the defenders of Pavlov's house in Stalingrad holding a single apartment building for 60 days to prevent a German breakthrough to the Volga. The 300 are almost always a deliberate sacrifice. The real story isn't one of magical invincibility, it's a story of brutal calculated trade-offs. High command often chooses to spend 300 of their most elite soldiers to save 30,000 others. The deep tragedy of the 300 versus 10,000 is that even when the small unit wins the battle and holds the line, they are often never the same again. They aren't just soldiers in that moment, they are the human currency used to pay for a larger victory. History proves that numbers are just a tool, but resolve, geometry, and terrain are the true masters of the battlefield. We've seen that with a perfect choke point, the right force multipliers, and a refusal to break under psychological pressure, 300 can indeed stop 10,000 in their tracks, but we want to hear from you. As we move into an age of autonomous drone swarms and AI-driven warfare, do you think the small unit stand is a relic of the past? Or will technology make it even easier for a handful of people to hold off an entire army? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the like button. Until next time, stay sharp.